Compliance, or RSPO. My name is Charles Beecroft. I'm the training manager today. I'm also joined by Judith Murdoch, who will also be speaking about the webinar in detail today. But because it's still early in the morning on a Tuesday, people might be still waking up or just like easing into the day. So we're going to start the webinar in about a minute and a half time, to give everyone just time to jump on when you have the chance. So yeah, so if you haven't had a chance, give yourself a nice cup of coffee, nice cup of tea as well. Maybe nip to the loo if you need to as well, and we'll start on the next minute or 2 minutes as well. So no rush, just take your time. I see there's about 24 of us already attending now, so really nice, a good attendance. But for those people just starting to join, we'll start in the next minute or so, just to give everyone time to come out of that, that meeting that finished at 10 a.m. and then you can start the webinar. We'll start the webinar in about 30 seconds or so. And I think that's as good a time as any. So just so thank you very much for everyone who's attending so far. My name is Charles Beecroft, for those who didn't hear at the beginning, and I am the training manager at NQA. I'm also joined here today by Judith Murdoch, who will be speaking through today's webinar, which will focus on EUDR palm oil compliance through RSPO certification. So Judith, if you can go to the next slide, please. That'd be fantastic. So yeah, so just a little introduction to NQA before we go into the actual crux of the webinar. As you can see from the slide here, NQA is a world-leading certification body with global operations. And not only do we specialize in high technology and engineering sectors as well, you can see the different areas that we specialize in around the globe. But as you can see, also from today's webinar topic, we're also expanding that reach as well for the topic for today. And it gives me a wonderful opportunity now to move on to Judith, who will now start the webinar from now. And I will turn my camera off, but if you do have any questions or queries, please use the chat function in the actual in the webinar as well. I'll be sort of tapping away on the chat, just answering questions. But any questions you do have for Judith, we have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, and we will answer those questions then and there. But thank you, Judith. You've been very patiently waiting for me to be quiet, and everyone can listen to Judith, and I will leave it to you in your capable hands. So thank you.
Thanks, Charles. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. So really the objective of today's webinar is to explore the relevance and the value of RSPO certification for compliance with the EUDR. And really the outcome that we want to achieve is to show how RSPO certification can help to assist in EUDR compliance, improve the reputation of your business, and also potentially open new opportunities for business. But probably crucially is the building supply chain traceability and transparency. So unfortunately, there's a little bit about me. I'm the technical manager at NQA for RSPO, but I have been an independent in palm oil for over 30 years, which is pretty scary. I've got extensive knowledge of manufacturing and decades of hands-on experience in oils and fats. So I hope that I really do understand the supply chain, and maybe that might be useful when we come on to questions. So the presentation is going to go into 3 areas. I'd like to do a little bit of background around palm oil, then look at EUDR requirements, and then RSPO and potential compliance. The one message is that we really don't have time in this webinar to answer every single aspect of it. It is a massive subject, but I hope with what we are going to present today that it will open the door and give you some ideas and direction of travel when thinking about using RSPO certification for compliance with the EUDR. So I'm going to set the scene because there will be some people on this webinar that are not 100% understanding around palm oil. So palm oil is found in everything from chocolate, pizza, instant noodles, shampoo, lipstick, detergent. And perhaps my favorite is toilet roll. It's the lotion that's used in many toilet rolls when you're buying from the luxury item at Bits. As an oil, it can be semi-solid at room temperature, and it's heat stable, and it's got a long shelf life. So it's a fantastic oil for using in processed foods, but also within cosmetics and home care. It produces more oil per land than any other equivalent vegetable crop. So 40% of the world's vegetable oil is palm oil, and it's just grown on 6% of the land that's used for all vegetable oil. So it's really quite unique. And the amounts that you would need to grow of soybean or coconut and sunflower can be between 4 to 10 times more land. The key factor in this is that it's a year-round harvest. You can harvest palm oil between 10 to 20 days compared to something like rapeseed and sunflower, which is once a year. So the message is switching from palm oil, because it potentially has caused deforestation, it has caused deforestation, into other crops is not the way forward. It would threaten other habitats and species just to make the same amount of oil. I'd like to just show these couple of graphs, because this use of land is really quite crucial and is the strongest message of why palm oil is so important to the world. So within Europe, palm oil has declined, but in the rest of the world, there's huge growth. And it is because, as I've already mentioned, that you can grow something like a quarter of 25% of palm oil on a hectare per ton of oil. So when you're looking at soybean, you've got 2 hectares, and palm oil, you've got less than a quarter of a hectare to actually grow that 1 ton of oil. The diagram to the right is something from ICUN, and it just shows the amount of land that we have in the world that you can actually grow agricultural crops on. So 29% of land, of which 71% is habitable, 46% is for agricultural crops, 31% then is, could be a whole range of different types of crops. And then you have the oil crops. And again, what's interesting here is how small palm oil is, but how big a yield you're actually getting from that palm oil compared to things like maize and soybean. Palm oil is grown in the regions around the world, around the equator, but its largest producers are Indonesia and Malaysia, accounting for over 85% of the global supply chain. And Indonesia in particular is the biggest grower and the biggest consumer. Palm oil is an interesting product because it's a dual yield. In other words, you're getting palm oil from the mesocarp, from the outside, from the orange, and a bit of fruit there. And then the actual kernel in the middle can also have oil extracted from it. So when we're thinking about EUDR, EUDR covers both these oils, but it does mean for the fruit itself, it's producing a wide range of oil types of different fatty acids, and you can do so much with it. And this is, again, very significant and very different to any other type of oil. One thing about palm oil is that many people across the equator use it for livelihoods. So particularly, as we've said, in Indonesia, there are over 7 million smallholders dependent on palm oil for their living, and they play a significant part in the palm oil industry. And if we were to move away from smallholders, it would have a major impact on communities. These 2 pictures are from photos that I took myself in Malaysia, and it shows 2 sisters, and basically their plantation was converted from rubber to palm oil plantation, and it's brought a lot of wealth into their village. And the picture below is their family, and how it's really changed the lives of particularly the girls who can afford to go to school, and how it's just bringing things like foods from outside of their farm so they can afford to buy other food. So it's a really lovely story, but smallholders could get left behind in EUDR. Palm oil is complex, so the supply chain means that at every stage traceability could be lost. Again, just some random photographs, but just shows you people take fresh fruit bunches on the back of trucks, small trucks. It's even been seen on the back of motorcycles. There are larger trucks moving fresh fruit bunches from the plantations, or coming into dealers. So the picture to the right-hand side at the bottom is taken in Indonesia, and that's a smallholder waiting for the trader to arrive at the end of his street, and he will pick it up and take it to the actual mill itself, where obviously it's thrown into a large pile of fresh fruit bunches, and then you have the mill itself. So there's a lot of mixing could potentially happen. When the crude palm is extracted from in the mill itself, the fresh fruit bunches are basically mixed, they go into conveyor belts, and then part of the process is to steam them. And the middle picture just shows you a steamer where the fruit is basically comes off that fresh fruit bunch. And eventually you end up with crude palm oil. So then you have the palm kernel. So that's the little nut in the middle of the fruit that I showed earlier. So that is crushed to extract the oil. And what is left is the picture to the far right, which is the expeller. Now, expeller is not part of the RSPO supply chain certification at the moment, but it is actually audited under the principles and criteria, and we're going to come on to that, but it is part of the EUDR requirement. And you might just say, well, what's it used for? There are no dairy herds in the UK that haven't been fed on palm kernel expeller. And that's the same within countries such as the Netherlands and also Germany. So it's a really good feedstock for the different, cattle in particular, and sheep, less so in pig production or in poultry production, but significant in cattle. So let's just have a quick look at the EUDR. So it's one of many new regulations around the world focusing on deforestation, and it's basically been brought in to reduce the environmental impact of deforestation linked to the production and consumption of 7 different commodities. Palm oil is one, cattle, wood, cocoa, soy, rubber, and coffee. And it is going to come into force in December 2025. It was delayed. Now, as we present now, I still don't know 100% if it's going to go ahead, but most people think that it will. So actually politically not go ahead, I think is probably a bad move by the EUDR. And particularly within palm oil is ready to go ahead. So it means that for companies selling the products, that they have to provide extensive information about their supply chains, including geolocation data and particularly due diligence procedures. And if you fail to do it, there is a 4% fine on turnover. So it is really focusing the mind. So EUDR is centered around the 7 products that we've talked about, but also something called Annex 1. So each of these products have a list of items that are within what they call Annex 1 that are in scope of the EUDR. And it's the HS code. So I'm sure some of you will have seen this before, but it's really important that if you are not moving these HS codes, then you are not in scope of the EUDR. So that's really the first point. However, it covers palm kernel, palm oil, and its fractions. And then you'll also see 2306, which is the oil cake, which is focusing on the expeller that I've mentioned. You also have a long list of earlier chemicals, but again, this is something that is causing some level of confusion. But the measure here, the key point here is if it's this HS code, you are in scope if you're moving these fatty acids and things like stearic acid. EUDR has been very, very complicated, and I would just like to point out the glycerol, which is here, this HS code covers every glycerol or glycerin. However, it could cover something that's 100% sunflower, so it doesn't mean to say that it's palm oil, so one to watch out for. Are you in scope when you're thinking if you are an operator? So we start off with an operator is a natural or legal person in the course of commercial activity that places relevant products on the market or exports them. So basically, if you're the first person or company, and I will just say the word person is used throughout the EUDR, or company, and you're putting it onto the market, you must comply with giving geospatial data and conduct due diligence and ensure that it's legally produced. So you have quite a key task here. You may be one step back, which is the trader, a person in the supply chain other than the operator, who in the course of the commercial activity makes relevant products available on the market. So the simplified version is, if you're buying products from an operator and then selling them within the EU, you're a trader. Remember, it's Annex 1 you're selling, nothing else. So you're not selling a bakery fat, it's just in Annex 1. If you're a large trader, you must perform due diligence. If you're a smaller trader, an SME, your obligations is to keep records of your suppliers and due diligence documents. The point here is SMEs are going to come into focus in June 2026, but the whole thing obviously was delayed, so we might even see some further delays around SMEs. Now, this becomes a little bit more complicated when you start thinking about the operator requirements. So here are elements of the EUDR text. It's taken from articles, but also from the many versions of the frequently asked questions. So as an operator, your requirement is that you have to implement a digital system to collect the geolocation data, conduct risk assessments and mitigate risks. Your liability is that you need to be fully compliant, even if you're relying on upstream data. Due diligence, you need to collect the due diligence information, so collecting the geolocation, the production dates, supply details and legality proof. You carry out risk assessments and mitigation and file a due diligence statement. I'm going to take a look at that when we get further along. And you have to put that into the EUDR information system. It is then verified. So the EUDR has already got its own mapping in place, and it will be verified against that. You need to audit supply documentation yourselves, but you could partner with certification bodies such as RSPO and FSC. What is interesting is this week alone, the Dutch authority has acknowledged RSPO, so making it very clear that they will take RSPO evidence. And I think if the Dutch are going to do it, particularly in palm oil, that's where a lot of the imports are coming into Europe. And also, if you're sitting in the UK, you'll be potentially receiving exports out of Europe into the UK from the Dutch market. So that is quite significant. And you need to give all access this information onto the platform. Traceability links product to specific plots of land and shipments, and use batch specific due diligence. So there is a lot more detail into this, and it's not something that we can spend the time going into. But again, it's the due diligence is quite specific against these shipments. Retention of data, so for at least 5 years. Checks, conduct annual internal audits and ensure alignment with the EUDR requirements, and obviously cooperate with the competent authorities, which each country in the EU has its own competent authority. And then we've already touched on the penalties and the possible fine of 4%. It's also saying that material would have to be removed off the market, which is probably quite significant as well if it was found to be non-compliant. So these are the top line requirements in the EUDR text and frequently asked questions about operator requirements. You then go on to trader, so they're slightly softer. One thing as well is that traders will be able to ask operators for the due diligence information through the actual platform, but also I'm sure with interfacing with their suppliers. But geolocation is going to remain a problem because of the amount of polygon data. So a lot of that won't travel to the traders. So the obligation is to submit a due diligence statement. Liability is for non-SME traders. May be liable for breaches including due diligence carried out by the upstream operator. Again, Due diligence, even if products come from the same land or supplier, due diligence should be updated and referenced. Verification, again, relying on the due diligence statement, accessing all of that information for your downstream. Traceability, traders must ensure traceability for each batch. You can't mix non-compliant material. Retention, again, of records for 5 years. Again, checks, following up examination of due diligence, and then obviously still will be, if found to be non-compliant, the penalties. Okay, so when we actually look at the operator and versus trader preparations and EUDR compliance, what's the difference? Well, operators are basically focusing on establishing and maintaining a due diligence system, and they're also need to verify the supply chain data, including geolocations and legality. Just want to underline legality because we're going to come and talk about that shortly. And then traders, again, they need to be ensuring that upstream due diligence has been checked, and that they can focus on documentation throughout the supply chain. These are just some headlines of the due diligence system that EUDR is requiring. So you need to create and maintain documented procedures, annual review and update, assign responsibilities to designated staff or teams, have internal controls and audits, record keeping, and document risk assessment and mitigation. So those are all the things that are required by the EUDR in a due diligence system, policy or procedure. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but wanted to include this because it just really sort of highlights the complexity of it. The bottom is if it comes into an EU country, travels through, traders will be given the information, and the only difference is if you change it out of Annex 1, it no longer takes part in the EUDR requirements. But if you're shipping it out or receiving it back in from a non-EU country, then the complexity starts again. So it's a lot about material coming in and out, and sometimes particularly in the other product commodities, cocoa and coffee, this is more of a nightmare than it is for palm oil, because palm oil tends to be brought in as palm oil or palm kernel, then made into an ingredient such as a bakery fat. So first of all, are you in scope of EUDR after we've just gone through that? Is any of the products that you buy in Annex 1? You may be an operator, you are a trader perhaps, or maybe you're a UK business with products in Annex 1 selling to the EU market. So if it's a yes, then we can look at some of the compliance, but you might be sitting there saying, no, you know what, no, I'm not in scope. But the one thing that I can almost guarantee is that you will have been asked by your downstream customers about EUDR data and due diligence information, and particularly this has been pushed by retailers. Even though you're not in scope, it is a question that has been asked, and the reason is that a lot of people see EUDR compliance in a way of being able to show their own due diligence and no deforestation or further backup to their own policies. So how can RSPO help towards EUDR compliance? So I've picked these headlines out of the things that I've just discussed, and we're going to take a look at the principles and criteria, which the diagram to the right is really covering, the 7 principles within the principles and criteria. So deforestation, land ownership, legally produced, polygon data, which is the geospatial data, the geolocation data, due diligence and traceability are the things that in the short time we're going to try to explore with the RSPO and how it can help comply. So just in case you're not quite sure who the RSPO and what RSPO certification is, the RSPO is a non-profit organisation. It's a global organisation. Its mission is to make sustainable palm oil the norm. It sets globally recognized standards covering environmental, social responsibility, transparency, and traceability. And today, it's a leading certifier with around 20% of all palm oil is being produced under RSPO certification. And RSPO has been preparing for EUDR by reviewing the standard, which was reviewed and has been now passed last year, but also by introducing the new IT platform Prisma, which hopes to capture a lot of the polygon data. It's still work in progress, but that is a key reason that RSPO launched this IT platform. I just wanted to talk about key stakeholders in the supply chain. So this is the unit of certification, the actors in the supply chain. So RSPO covers growers and mills, crushers, refiners, manufacturers, and is passing that information on to retailers. So the full supply chain is covered by RSPO. RSPO has two types of certification: principles and criteria, which covers the plantation and the mill. So it's the mill that's certified, and it is the mill's responsibility to ensure that the fresh fruit bunches that come into that mill are produced in alignment with the RSPO standard. The principles and criteria are mandatory, whereas the supply chain certification, which is where NQA plays a significant role, is a voluntary. But it does mean that every single part of the chain needs to be RSPO certified in order to make a claim. And the claim is not about putting it on pack, it's actually about passing that information down. So if you're a manufacturer and you want to feel confidence in your supply chain, then you know when it's been passed through your supplier and their supplier that it's been audited to the supply chain certification standard. So the principles and criteria, there are 7 principles that cover ethical, legal, product efficiency, and positive impacts. It thinks about people too, with respect to human rights, smallholder inclusion, a big point here, respect of workers' rights and conditions, and then principle 7, which is protecting and conserving and enhancing ecosystems. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of looking at how RSPO supports EUDR compliance, and this one is for deforestation. As I've said, we just really don't have enough time to go through each element. So these are the big messages. So EUDR requires the product not to have originated from land that's been deforested after December 31st, 2020. The important point here is the RSPO cutoff date for deforestation is November 2018. It had got a deforestation point in the previous standards starting in 2005, but they were weaker. And this really, from 2018, has been quite significant in that the RSPO certification aligns with the EUDR requirement, but specifically it does it through 2 specific reports that are needed to become RSPO certified. And it starts off with a high conservation value, which looks at significant environmental and social and cultural values. And it's based on 6 criteria of biodiversity, eco-services, community needs, cultural and landscape, and species diversity. So that is something that needs to take place. Then you have high carbon stock, which came and was developed originally by 2 sets of scientists, one including Greenpeace, and then it merged together. And what it basically is another significant report that contains, looks at the amounts of carbon stored in vegetation and soil and how it should be preserved to mitigate climate risk, climate change. And it talks about the canopy and cutoff dates and land ownership and legal production and so on. So any agricultural land that is converted from forest after the 31st of December 2020 is considered deforested under the EUDR. So the message is quite clear that there are some differences in definitions. I think that is so important to highlight. You know, go ask and say, even in your own policies, what's our definition of deforestation? So there is some differences, but the key is the RSPO dates, is nothing can be deforested after that November 2018 date. So that is quite significant how EUDR compliance can be seen in RSPO. In terms of due diligence frameworks, the EU requires companies to have a due diligence system, as we've seen, to assess and mitigate risk. And this includes due diligence statements for shipments and a due diligence policy. So how does RSPO help? Well, the fact it has audits and certification processes, it offers a ready-made framework for risk assessment and documentation and third-party verification. And that is really, really crucial. Remember, every single part of your supply chain has gone through some form of audit, whether it be the supply chain certification or the principle and criteria, which is mandatory, and therefore it's risk assessment, and there is documentation and evidence throughout the supply chain. It helps because this is a typical due diligence statement that EUDR would be expecting to see. And in here again, it would accept RSPO certification as some of the supporting evidence within the declaration. So this would be quite typical about putting geolocation data in there, obviously location of where it's actually been grown. So there's an awful lot of information that would automatically be coming to you through RSPO systems, as well as actually having to ensure that you have this level of detail that's going into the EUDR trace system, which has got to be submitted for every shipment. This looks at legal compliance. Again, legal compliance is very interesting because one, EU requires products must comply with local laws in country of origin, which is, yeah, that's easy, isn't it? How do you know that? What are the laws that are in place? And then it has this point of there should be no legal or illegal deforestation. So quite significant there, that even if a country says, oh, it's legal to take this, they're saying, oh, well, we still don't want deforestation. RSPO certification includes legal compliance checks, and this includes land tenure, labour rights, environmental regulations are all part of the RSPO audits, and in particular the principles and criteria. Now, I know this will probably be quite small on your screens, but what I've done is literally go to the RSPO website and gone into the first grower and mill and gone into their audit report, just very random, and gone down to the particular criteria that starts to look at the legality of the fresh fruit bunches and the geolocation. And this is just a screenshot, random screenshot. What it's showing is that in reference to 2.1.2 is that there's legal compliance in place. The unit of certification has established a documented system, and then it goes on to describe that in more detail. So that's something that I have just accessed because I know the mill that potentially is in my supply chain. So quite crucial when you're considering maybe trying to pull together due diligence statements, or even due diligence statements when you're not in scope of the EUDR. So the RSPO supports EUDR compliance through traceability to source. Well, how does it do that? So the EU requires this traceability to plot where the commodity has been produced. So first of all, RSPO has the supply chain systems that it's always used, and we're going to go on and talk about those in some more detail. But as I've mentioned earlier, it launched Prisma, and the idea with Prisma is that it's going to be able to capture that polygon data. Now, as we speak, RSPO is still having some teething issues, ensuring that Prisma is up and running properly. But when this becomes fully functional, part of the ongoing plan is to see how much traceability can be put through the whole system of Prisma. So you could be further down the supply chain and be able to gain this information. So just want to highlight, still work in progress, but the RSPO is working very hard to actually establish that. But right now we have the supply chains in place. So the RSPO have 3 supply chain models. So when somebody comes to audit under the supply chain certification standard or under the principles and criteria, the material is leaving as either identity preserved or segregated. So the supply chain model identity preserved is the high ground. It's one mill and its supply base traveling through the system in isolated shipments, etc., right through to the end product. Perfect. However, it is expensive because at every stage it has to be kept isolated. So you can imagine as a manufacturer, keeping items segregated away from anything else might become quite complicated. And because it's just coming through one source, the things like tanks and shipping add that cost. So it is available, and it is the high ground, and there is identity preserved shipments entering the UK and Europe as we speak. However, it's limited. So the main supply chain model is segregated. So the mills are audited to the principles and criteria, and it's up to them to ensure that their supply base is aligned to the RSPO principles and criteria standards. So it's either an owned plantation or whatever fresh fruit bunches they take in. Every mill becomes identity preserved at that point if there's no non-certified material in it. However, as it leaves and it is transported through the system, that's when it becomes mixed, but it can only be mixed with other certified sources. So segregated is the most used and is the one that offers the most security, traceability, and we'll talk about that shortly. The third one is mass balance. Now, under EUDR, you cannot use mass balance. And when they talk about mass balance, they talk about mass balance of EUDR compliant and non-EUDR compliant. So I think important to highlight that. However, the RSPO are reviewing the standard right now and are looking to see if they can strengthen mass balance to give more additional data, and that could be available in 2026. And it's very much focused on what's happening in PRISMA. But basically, mass balance means that a mill has received non-certified material and then it travels through the system as non-certified and certified, and then can be continually mixed. So I highlighted just a little bit about segregated and why segregated is such a useful supply chain to actually use. So this is the picture is from Rainforest Alliance, and basically what Rainforest Alliance have done is that they have listed all confirmed palm oil mills, which currently stands at 2,300. I'd say there's probably a few more than that. But the RSPO certified mills globally currently stand at 462. These mills have met the rigorous environmental and social standards set by the RSPO, which includes the responsible land use, fair labour practices, and traceability across the supply chain. 95 certified growers are linked to these mills, which seems a low figure, but actually is quite significant. And there are over 6,000 facilities that hold RSPO supply chain certification throughout the supply chain. So again, this whole idea of you've got it's certified palm and it's been traced and processed throughout the system. And then to reiterate that the mills at the moment that are producing sustainable palm oil is between 18 to 19% of global production. So if I'm thinking about EUDR, and I'm thinking about the RSPO certified mills, that 460, half are actually are mass balance and half are IP mills. So the IP mills are the ones that are shipping segregated. So if you are buying segregated palm oil, you know that it's only coming from, say, 230, 250 mils, which is, again, quite significant in terms of traceability and thinking about due diligence and thinking about the information that you have. I just want to touch on the supply chain certification standard. So the 3 or 4 examples that I've given you about deforestation and legality are all around the principles and criteria. So that's what's happening at the mill at origin. So once that material is left and it enters the supply chain, you can be audited to the supply chain certification standard. So just thinking of the different things that we've highlighted before. So there's general chain of custody requirements, so that you have to be an RSPO member. You have to choose which supply chain model that you're going to use, whether it be IP, segregated, or mass balance. You could then have all of that information that you've got documented procedures. So it's your whole process has to be documented. How are you handling that material coming in? It focuses on purchasing and goods in. So you're getting delivery notes, you're getting certificates of assurance with information on that. And then you have got outsourcing activities that you're thinking about, sales and goods out, what you're telling your customers, registration of transactions, which is more for upstream players within the supply chain, but again might become more focused even for manufacturers. There is training, so you're making sure people know what they're doing. Record keeping, minimum of 2 years. Our EUDR was 5 years, but again, it's just giving you a level of how you should keep your records for. Conversion factors, which is thinking about conversion from segregated to mass balance, what claims you make, if you've had any complaints, again, thinking about grievances, thinking about what's going on in your supply chain, and then ensuring that there is a management review. So the benefits of RSPO certification, environmental and social. So the benefits are it covers the supply chain, it's promoting responsible palm oil production and, you know, to protect forests, biodiversity and local communities. And it ensures fairer labour practices, and it's protecting workers' rights, supports sustainable livelihoods, particularly in Southeast Asia, and particularly we're thinking about smallholders. But there is a commercial benefit because it's helping improve reputation and showing customers they are, you know, that you are committed to ethically sourcing, and it could open new markets and consumer segments as people are actually now wanting to know about traceability and certification. And the supply chain management is really building traceability and transparency to improve risk management and thinking about continuous looking at environment and social issues. So RSPO is really bringing a large proportion of benefits and also helping you set up a due diligence system because the paperwork and the structure is already there. So in conclusion, the RSPO isn't fully compliant to the EUDR. There are bits that are not aligned, and I think, you know, the forest description in particular is one that, you know, highlighted it earlier. However, it is giving you a really strong platform. So becoming an RSPO certified member will ensure organisations are better equipped to deal with it because already this information is flowing. Already your suppliers have got this type of information. Already they're verifying that the suppliers above them are RSPO certified and have been audited. Using RSPO could ensure organisations are subject to fewer checks by the EU member states. So there are not going to be checks on every single shipment going in, but if it's coming with RSPO information, then if you have got quite small teams in the competent authorities, and that is significant, is the teams are not going to be large. If they can see it's RSPO, they are possibly more likely to leave that alone compared to something that isn't RSPO. And the EUDR, as I've already mentioned, is recognising these third-party verified schemes as tools that can be used for companies in their risk assessment. So again, the Dutch in particular have highlighted that quite publicly. Again, it's the fact that these systems are helping you putting these tools in place. And organisations will be able to show that they go beyond the EUDR legal minimum requirements of no deforestation and legality. And it instills trust within stakeholders who continue to have concerns about the environmental issues. So that is my final slide, and we can go to some questions. And certainly, just to say, you know, there's all sorts of further support through NQA and so on. But I would just like to leave it on that conclusion slide and ask if there are any questions at the moment. Charles.
Okay, thank you very much for the webinar so far, Judith. We've got 2 questions actually. So one that just come in from Christoph, but I'll take off one earlier from Elliot. So Elliot has asked, does EUDR apply to a non-EU member purchasing Annex A materials from EU members without them processing this Annex 1 item further?
So if you are so if you're somebody sitting in the UK and you're shipping into the EUDR, you are and you're moving Annex 1 material, you do have to comply with the EUDR. If you are in the EUDR and you're shipping the material out into the UK, for an example, then again, the information would actually come with that. You are obliged to give export information for somebody within the UK to receive it. And I think an interesting one for us in the UK is Northern Ireland, because nobody really understands where that's going to settle. The UK government hasn't made any view on its own policy on deforestation. But if you are sitting in Northern Ireland and shipping into Southern Ireland, then you would have to, you are basically operating as an operator, or certainly the first person who takes that material from you. So you would be obliged to have all of that information in place as an operator. And then the person who receives it in Ireland could be described as an operator. There are some real vague definitions around this, or it could be seen as a trader. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, and thank you for that. Hopefully, Ella, if you don't answer your question, then let us know. If it doesn't, any follow-ups, let us know, and Judith can help as well. So we've got a second question from Christoph. Are operators required to submit relevant documents in the EUDR system before importing each batch?
Yes. So what would happen is that, and I'll describe a tanker coming from Malaysia, for an example. It would set off from Malaysia, but probably take 3 months to get to the European market, and probably about 3 to 4 days out will submit that information. That will be processed, and then it's been described as a token, but now it's also been described as a reference number, will be given to that particular shipment. So yes, it has to go in before it actually arrives actually within the EU, so so basically it can be released before it gets there. I think mainly done to actually stop people you know, arriving and having, you know, either shipments on ships that can't get off because they haven't got this token. So it has to be done before it actually hits the point of import.
Perfect. Christoph, again, like with Elliot's question, then if you do have any follow-ups, let us know, and hopefully that's answered your question. I've seen actually Elliot has had a follow-up as well, but I'll go to IO's question just briefly. So I believe they've asked, does palm oil mill affluent appear within Annex 1? And this is also the case for palm fatty acid distillate.
So the palm oil effluent doesn't appear in Annex 1, but the but expeller does. So again, anything that's coming into Europe as expeller will have to go under the EUDR, which is going to be really complicated because expeller is mixed far more because of the crusher themselves can be at mill, or can be you ship the actual kernel off to a crusher. And then it's mixed again. So that is going to be an area where it is very difficult. In terms of the fatty acids, if I just remember the end of that question, fatty acids, as described in Annex 1, will be included. I think the bit and my experience when I'm talking to people within earlier chemicals is if it's say contained in sodium lauryl sulfate and obviously it isn't in the HS code, then it wouldn't come under EUDR. But if you are shipping in any of those others, then it would come under EUDR. Then this is where it is really, really difficult, because how do you trace a fatty acid back to that geolocation? It is far, far more complicated than anything else. And the risk factor on this right now for EUDR is that people don't ship it in and try to do a different supply chain in a different direction. Again, I hope that answers your question.
Again, perfect. I'll just go back to actually to Elliot's point, because Elliot's actually provided a follow-up. And so he says, just to be sure I understand, EUDR in essence concerns inter-EU movement and movement from EU members outwardly, where they must provide all due diligence.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you are an EU, it's EUDR. If you are, sorry, if you're an EU country, you have to supply or have information. If you import it in and you are an EU company, then you have to have that data. If you export it out, you are also obliged to pass that data out. And then equally, if you are somebody sitting in Indonesia or Malaysia or UK or Northern Ireland, if you're putting it into the EU market, you are obliged to give due diligence statements. As I've said, I'm still seeing some difficulty around geolocation polygon data. I think that's one of the biggest issues at the moment. I think due diligence statements are going to be easier to produce and a lot more information will be available, but it's the actual polygon data which will be more tricky. But that is really the operator, so the first person who puts it on the market, that is obliged to put those geolocations in. And it could be that if it's an EU company, that they're obliged to make sure that that information is given to them for the EU platform.
Great. Perfect, thank you. And again, I hope that answers your question as well. Actually, Ellen has responded, excellent. Thank you very much for clarifying all this for me. So Elliot, that's one question done. So actually, I'm going to go on to Apendra. I know you've just put a question in there, but I'm going to go back to Christoph, because Christoph has provided a follow-up point on his question about submitting documents. So he says, so does the absence of a reference number or token prevent the import process? Would the goods be held at customs?
I think it will be, yes, because that reference number is if you like, the point of we accept this material. So I believe it will hold it at customs if you didn't have one.
Perfect. Okay, Christoph, again, like Elliot as well, if that answers your question, fantastic. Any follow-ups, let us know. But I'm going to go now to Apendra, who's been waiting very patiently. Does RSPO address the risk of consuming palm oil's high saturated fat content, which can lead to an increased LDL cholesterol and a higher risk of cardiovascular diseases?
So RSPO does not look at any health risks as such. It doesn't look at any of that. I think the one point I would make is that RSPO is looking at how the oil is produced and tries to ensure that the fresh fruit bunches and so on are produced to the highest of standards. So the quality of the oil is quite significant, and that is not related to the fat content, but related to things such as contaminants. One thing about palm oil, it's a 50-50 split. And so again, further down the supply chain, that's where you can be using other oils to reduce the saturate level. But RSPO does not look at the fat content of palm oil, no.
Okay. Perfect. Apendra, I hope that answers the question. He says it does. I said, okay, thanks. That's fantastic. But also as well, Christoph, Io as well, if you do have any follow-up questions, let us know. There are actually no more questions, Judith, as of yet. But I'm happy to wait a minute or two for any sort of last stragglers to come through, if you're okay with that. We'll wait for a couple more minutes, a minute or two, seeing the last stragglers come through. in terms of any more questions, but there are no questions as of yet. Christoph says, thank you for all the answers. Thank you, Judith, for that, and we'll see if any more comes through, but we'll wait a minute or so, and then we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, and just whilst we're waiting and sort of waiting to finish off, I think one of the most important things is that RSPO is seen as the leader of the pack in terms of the EUDR compliance compared to other types of certification, but FSC and PFC again are supporting with compliance around timber-based products. And obviously the team at NQA also handle FSC and PFC. And I think that EUDR, the sentiments of the regulation are very important to stop deforestation. But by taking part in RSPO, it's a really strong message to everyone about stopping deforestation and helping biodiversity, and in particular ensuring that, you know, smallholders are included, because that is again a big focus for the RSPO.
Amazing. We've actually had one question actually from Aya as well. So she says, thank you. Just one more, please. How would renewable fuel schemes such as ZEMO, or ZEMO, apologies if I'm not pronounced that incorrectly, integrate with the RSPO?
So at the moment, RSPO does not cover fuels, but it is now part of the RSPO's work to look at that. So particularly aviation has been something that I am aware that they're looking at. So they are definitely broadening their certification and how you know, what they're going to certify and how they bring all of that in. So I mean, when it first started, it was just very focused on food. You know, it's now very focused on all types of earlier chemicals, the mill effluent, which was a comment earlier, and those other byproducts are all things that are going to come within certification. And the supply chain certification standard is under review now. NQA has a seat at the table. I'm particularly working on earlier chemicals and food service. But I do know that other team members, as in other companies, are part of that working group, will be looking at those, but it's not part of it yet, no.
Okay, no more questions, but I gave it a couple of minutes before. We got one question there, so I think we might end the webinar there. And we've definitely taken a lot of Judith's time today, but hopefully it's been a wonderful time, obviously learning more about the topic. But I just want to say thank you very much to Judith for presenting today's webinar.
Thanks very much.
Amazing, perfect. But if you do have any questions or anything, please, that might come off this webinar or anything like that, please see the slide there, all the different ways you can contact NQA, both our website, further our training at nqa.com. You can call us as well, or you can visit us on LinkedIn. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for some of the comments on the chat, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their day. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.